Okay. So last week we talked about digital marketing. So I think I gave you 6 principles, if I remember right, for digital marketing, which hopefully put your mind at ease about some of these things because I know that it can be super intimidating. But today we're going to kind of zoom in a bit, which I think will be nice. We're going to talk about all things web and email marketing. So I'm going to give you my top 10 tips for startup websites, which I think will be really helpful. And then we're going to also dive into email marketing at the end. The thing is when it comes to building a website and doing email marketing, those are 2 things that I could easily spend 12 weeks alone, right, on each topic. But I've worked really hard to really hone this material down so that my hope is that today I can give you kind of the basic essentials of what you really need to know to get going, and just really actionable stuff that you can run with as you move forward in building and launching your business. So per usual, I often sometimes start with the negative. Just call me Negative Nilly today. I want to start with 5 kind of startup blunders per se. So 5 things that I feel like startups kind of go wrong when it comes to building their website. So that's where I want to start. Okay, so science has shown, you may have heard this before, that the average human has an attention span of around 7 seconds these days, which, did you know that's actually shorter than the attention span of a goldfish? It's true. It is true. So when it comes to your website, you have very, very little time to grab attention and drive action, right? Which is what we want to do. In fact, some studies have been shown, it depends on who you read, that we only have 3 seconds to really reel in web visitors on our site. So paying attention to these blenders that I'm going to share with you, it will really help you to avoid, that jumping off point or people clicking on your site and then just leaving. So I want to go through these so that you're able to create a site that's clear, that's compelling, and that's worth checking out for more than just that glance, because that's all you might get otherwise. So, okay, the first one I want to talk about is underestimating the power of first impressions. More often than not, I think we underestimate how very, very powerful the first impression is, whether it's that first impression you get of a person, a place, or a website, right? Same thing. And as I've said before, humans are a judgy lot, right? And people are going to make snap judgments about you and your business based on what they see at a glance, just at a glance, right? That's all we get. Not after they dig deep, not after they've read all your content and really analyzed and try to figure out what you're doing. All you get is a glance sometimes. And so we know, right, from research and just common sense these days, we know that almost everybody goes to a website of a business before they take any further steps with you or even consider buying from you or visiting your brick and mortar if you have a brick and mortar shop. So that means if you have a website that's unprofessional or unhelpful or unattractive, whatever, most people are just going to assume that about your business. They're going to assume that your business is unprofessional and unhelpful, even if that's not true. So unfortunately, one bad impression is all it takes to turn away a potential customer for good. It's the same thing we said about logos, right? You might have the most amazing abilities and talents at what you do, but if your website looks dreadful, people are less likely to believe that you're top notch at what you do, even if that's just at a subconscious level. So just to give you a very timely example, I have a current client right now. I won't say their name. They do ABA therapy for children with autism. It's a really wonderful organization. It's a super professional place. I've toured it. I've met the caregivers and the kids, and it's just an amazing place. And we're doing their website for them. And we told them they needed to get some professional photography, headshots of their team, because their photos were really old and outdated, and some of the people that work there now aren't represented. So we gave them some names of some professional photographers, and they decided they wanted to do it in-house. And somebody on staff kind of fancies themselves a graphic designer, but really isn't. And they thought, since what they do is very play-based, so play-based therapy is what they do, they thought, well, let's make it really playful. And we're all about that. We made their copy really playful. We really built that into the design of the site. Long story short, I got their photos yesterday, and they made them like really over the top silly. They like photoshopped silly things into the pictures, like animals and cartoon characters. And it is funny and it's cute and it's playful, but I had to write them back and say, you know what? People who don't already know you and love you are going to look at this and go, what is going on? It looks super weird and super unprofessional. And I said, all you get is one glance. And if someone clicks on your about page and sees all these crazy photos, because they don't know them yet, right? They're going to drop their kiddos all day off at this place with these grownups with these ridiculous pictures. And so anyway, just a really timely example of how important that first impression is. Now, I told them those pictures are very funny and they could be used internally or maybe in a newsletter or something like that. But when it comes to your website, where total strangers are coming, and prospective clients or customers are coming, we want that first impression to be stellar. Okay? So there you go. I even thought about sharing them with you, but I restrained myself. Okay, number 2, another way that startup websites tend to go off the rails is to have tech issues, right? So when you don't invest enough time or money in building a website, or you try to DIY it without the right expertise, there's a good chance that you can end up with a site that has some tech struggles. So things like slow load times, broken images, broken links, poor search engine optimization, right? And a host of other things that can go wrong. And so these are the kinds of things that not only reduce the likelihood that people will find you online, because Google is going to maybe change the ranking of your site based on some of these issues, but they can also just irritate the heck out of users. And again, cause them to make snap judgments if parts of your website are broken or they can't find what they need. That is an issue with lots of kind of shoestring budget type websites. So that's something to keep in mind too. Number 3, too much clutter. This is probably the biggest one, honestly, that I see most often. I think sometimes we try to make our websites just work too hard to do everything and say everything all at once, right? But when you don't lean into white space and other good design principles and you use way too many words, the thing that happens usually is that people get visually overwhelmed. And when they get visually overwhelmed, they leave. That's just what happens. And so it turns people away, and it really, you shoot yourself in the foot, because what you're trying to do is give them lots of information and you end up giving them no information because they bail on you. So that's a big problem. All right, number 4, confusing or unclear messaging. So I'll talk more about this one specifically in a minute, but it's a really common mistake that business websites of all sizes make. So sometimes it's the result of just being too wordy or using internal language or jargon, right? Or sometimes it's just not being clear in what you're saying. So no matter what, it can be a killer for your website. People are not going to stick around long enough to try to figure out what you're saying and whether or not it's what they're looking for. They're just not. So that's something to look out for too. And then the last one here is the lack of a clear call to action. So we call this CTA in the marketing world. I see this time and time again on websites where people spend all this time and money creating a nice, fancy website, but they don't tell visitors what they want them to do next, right? So we want to think strategically about what that next step is that we want visitors to take when they come to our website. And then we want to make that step really clear, really front and center, and really easy to take. So maybe that next step for you is that you want them to sign up for something, or you want them to call you, or you want them to buy something. Whatever that next step is, it's important to think strategically ahead of time about what that step is and make sure that that is baked into your homepage and your website front and center. So, all right. I have had people ask me when it comes to websites, they ask often, do I really need one? Like with a startup, we're all on a budget. We're trying to make things happen. And so sometimes people will ask, do I have to have a website? Can't I just have a Facebook page or something? Can't I just focus on word of mouth or social media? And my answer to that question always is that yes, you need a website. You do. Maybe not from day one. Maybe it's not something you have to do from the get-go. But I want to explain why I feel so strongly about this. So I want you to think about your website as your home base, as the hub of all your marketing activities, right? It's the central spot for you to tell the story of your business and drive engagement with customers or prospective customers. So you can use social media for all kinds of great things, right? You can use it to raise awareness, to create engagement, to get people to your site. But social media should not be your central hub. You do not want all your eggs in that basket. You don't have any control there, right? So like we've talked about before, social media changes by the minute, it seems. And so that makes having a reliable home base and access to your own customers, all the more important. We're going to touch on that a little bit when we talk about email. We're going to talk more about the unpredictability of social media next week when we talk social media. But just for now, know this. Social media sites like Facebook are making it harder and harder to organically get in front of the right people. And by organically, I mean without paying them for advertising, right? Because they want you to buy advertising. They make lots of money that way. And so they're making it harder and harder for us to organically get in front of these people. So they get to make up their own rules. They get to change the game, right? And so this is why you don't want to depend on social media as your primary vehicle for reaching your audience. Social media is awesome. It's a powerful tool. We're going to spend time on it next week. But you need a home base where you're in charge and you make the rules. So I hope that makes sense, because it's really important to think about as you're kind of thinking through your strategy for marketing. So when it comes to designing a website, writing a website, getting one created, right, there are a million different directions you can run. And I know that it can be really overwhelming to know where to even start with it. So it's kind of like, I think about being a writer, that dreaded empty page syndrome, right? It's a little bit like that, I know, because it's this blank slate and there are, like I said, a million different ways you can go with it. But I've been helping websites create businesses for almost 20 years now, which really makes me feel old today. And I want to share with you a list of 10 tips I've put together. These are things that I still keep front and center with every web project that my company does. They are 10 things that you can do for your own website to help it really become that tool that you need it to be to grow your business. So let's start at the top. So number one, keeping the user experience front and center as far as your focus goes. This is so important. I know I hammer this a lot, but it goes back to target audience. You have to keep them top of mind and their needs top of mind as you develop your website. You have to. You want it to be super easy for them to navigate, super easy for them to read, and super easy for them to find exactly what they are looking for. Not what you want them to know, not what you want them to see or do, but what they are looking for. Because if they show up on your homepage and can't find what they are specifically looking for, it doesn't matter how great your website graphics are and your content or whatever, they're going to be frustrated and chances are they're going to leave. So the second tip is to really focus on having uncluttered, clean design. Trying to do too much on a page, like I said before, it shoots you in the foot. It dilutes your efforts and it likely turns people away. So the information really needs to be prioritized and there needs to be a hierarchy to it, right? So that you can make sure that the most important things that they need to see or find can be seen and found really, really quickly. So make white space your friend and limit what you put on there to just the essentials, if that makes sense. Number 3, crystal clear messaging. I have a mantra that I use for myself and my team all the time, and that is be clear, not clever. I think it can be tempting to be cutesy and clever, especially with web copy, because it's often more conversational, but it's more important to be clear. So you want to watch out for using jargon or unfamiliar terms, and you want to cut to the chase. Donald Miller, I know I've talked about him before. He has a company called StoryBrand. He talks about the grunt test for a homepage. I love this. He talks about, could a hypothetical caveman discern in a mere glance what your business is all about and what you have to offer? So think about the grunt test when you're thinking about your messaging. Number 4, audience-centric. I've talked about this before too. So this is the idea of speaking to your audience, not at them. Speaking to their needs, their pain points, their dreams, their goals, right? Too many businesses talk about themselves too much. So you want to think about having a conversation with an actual person, right? It's like, have you ever sat down with someone who talks about themselves the whole time? Annoying and not helpful. So you don't want to do that, because those kinds of self-centered conversations are awful. So you want to talk to somebody who's attentive to your needs, right? Who cares about your needs. And so the same goes for a website. So go back to our example as well last week of kind of envisioning pulling up a chair next to someone who wants to learn more about your business and having an informal conversational chat with them, right? So you're not going to talk about yourself the whole time, and you're not going to talk in a stiff, stiff formal way. So get yourself in that frame of mind when you set out to write your copy, and it'll take you a long way. So, all right. And then the fifth one here is to use web-friendly language. So this is a great reason actually to hire out the writing of your website if you can afford to do that, because good web writers know how to write in this format, since people read differently online than they do on paper. So good web writers know how to grab attention, they know how to keep attention, they know how to prioritize the information, and they know how to use smart web writing tactics. So things that if you're writing it yourself, you can keep in mind: crafting short sentences, right? Digestible paragraphs, skimmable information. I don't even know if that's a real word, but you know what I mean. So using bullet points, using headers, using subheaders, because people don't read online like they do in a book, left to right, top to bottom. There have been all kinds of cool eye mapping studies done to show how web users actually read and glean information from websites, and their eyes bounce around. It's nothing like book reading. So, they're drawn to common patterns, like they're drawn to images, they're drawn to headings, to lists and things like that. So you got to keep those things in mind, and you don't want to write it like you would words on a page, a print page. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's move on to the last 5. Number 6 is to have an obvious, clear call to action. So what do you want users to do? Buy something, call you, fill out a form, right? Decide what this one, maybe it's 1 step, maybe it's 2. I usually encourage my clients to have 1 clear call to action, but sometimes it's 2 depending on the company. Make sure that those things are front and center. Don't give them a million different options or routes. Tell them the 1 or 2 things that you want them to do, and then make it easy to do it. All right, number 7, I think this one's super important, especially when you're just starting out. Having a professional looking website does wonders for street cred, right? So we all want that street credibility. It's hard to convince people that you're an actual professional, trustworthy business without a website. And so having one is a great way just to build some street cred, right? And then there are specific things that you can do on your website to really beef that up. So things like testimonials, if you can feature client logos, that would be great, or case studies, or affiliations if you're affiliated with different organizations, or if you have any kind of accreditation. I mean, obviously this is different based on what kind of business you have, or sort of an as seen in section if you have any publicity, or if you give talks or anything like that, that you can give this kind of at a glance credibility, is a great way to do it. And the more it can be at a glance, the better. So if it's something where people don't have to read a bunch of copy to get that credibility, but instead if it's logos or just bullet points that people can see at a glance, like, oh, this person has done some things, So that is a really powerful thing, especially when you're just starting a business and you're trying really hard to get some traction. So number 8 might seem like a no-brainer, but making sure that it's really easy for people to know how to contact you. So it's nice to give a couple different ways, possibly, in case some people have preferences. Some people don't like filling out forms, for example. They don't trust them or whatever. So I usually have an email address at the bottom if somebody just would rather email me. So making sure that stuff's easy to find on your website will be helpful. And then number 9, making sure that your website is optimized, right, for different kinds of devices and different browsers and for search engines, right? You want your site to load quickly and display well across different kinds of devices like iPads, phones, laptops, right? People are looking at our websites on all kinds of different devices. So you want to make sure that it's optimized and works well in all those kinds of platforms. And really it's important for search engine optimization, because Google actually punishes websites for having poor optimization. And by punish, I mean they can lower your ranking, right, in the search results. So there are just some this stuff's over my head in terms of like how to make that happen. But just know that there are some critical back-end pieces. I call it back-end. So it's the development, the code part of your website that a good developer is going to know the ins and outs of. So yet another reason, in my opinion, to not DIY this job, if at all possible. The nice thing is if you end up going with some of these templated website services, which we'll talk about in a minute, a lot of those already have that baked in. So it's not something that you usually have to worry about with those. And then number 10, compelling photography. So having beautiful professional photography that fits your brand well is so important. Visuals draw the eyes almost 100% of the time before words. And so the images you use on your site are so important. You've heard, what's the adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? It's very true. So there is stock photography out there, which most of you probably are familiar with, photography that someone else has taken that you can either download for free or buy online. That's stock photography. It's easy to find, and it's usually a lot cheaper than hiring a professional photographer, but those kinds of photos can often be really cheesy. They can often look really generic and give people the wrong vibe about your business. So I do recommend having personalized professional photography if you can. It's far more personal, it's far more authentic, and it fits in with everything we've said the last couple of weeks about human to human marketing and building that personal connection. If they can see your face, it's going to go a really long way in building that connection. But I know that it's not always cheap to have nice photography. I know that. So it is something that if you have to, you can put off until maybe like a phase 2 or phase 3, meaning you could launch a website without it if you had to, and then you could add that later if you need to kind of budget out your expenses. But in the meantime, at least working with a graphic designer can help. If you need to lean into stock photography, a good designer knows where to source kind of better quality stock photos and how to avoid the ones that look overly generic or yucky. So I always recommend working with somebody who just has a really good eye for that. Plus, I don't know if you've ever looked for stock photography, but it's a bit like a black hole because there's so many options out there. So it can be helpful to have somebody who does this all the time. Find it for you. So I think I mentioned before that when I launched my Dropleaf website and had the first one built, I did not have a budget for photography at all. So I had a friend who really was just a dabbler in photography. She took some photos for me for free. They weren't amazing, but they were good enough for me to launch my website and to have on there. And then a few years later, I had another friend who was just starting a photography business take my photos for cheap, and they were better than the first ones I had, but they still weren't amazing, but they did the job. And then really, it was just last year, you guys, that I actually had my first full-blown photo shoot with a professional photographer. And as much as I hated I don't like having my pictures taken, and I wasn't jazzed about spending the money, it was worth every penny. I mean, I could write it off, which is great, but I've already seen the fruit of it. It made my website look super sharp. It's helping with brand awareness. And even more than that, it is causing prospects to feel that personal connection with me and want to engage with me in my business. I've seen it already, and I've only had them up for, 6 months, or not even 6 months yet. So anyway, I definitely urge you to think about photography as a really important piece. I think sometimes it's an afterthought. Like we have our websites, getting put together, and they're like, oh, I guess we should throw some photos in there. But I would urge you to make them a bigger deal in your to-do list and in your mind. So, all right. Well, I urge you to hold on to this list of 10 tips. You can use it if you already have a website. Use it to kind of rank or rate your current site, and then if not, as you're having one created, use it as a checklist to go through as you're having your site created. So, okay, now I want to talk about how you go about getting a website, right? I know a lot of you do not have one yet, or most of you. So I want to talk about that. There are different routes, as you know, for getting one built. And I'm just going to walk you through a couple things that I think will be helpful. Basically, there are two main ways that I like to think about how sites are built. And I want to just talk through that real quickly because it can be a confusion point for people. And I think it'll help you make a more informed decision. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time here, but I just want to break these two down. I like to think about websites kind of being in these two different camps. So custom coded and templated. So I think about it almost like a coloring book, like coloring. You could have a blank page, and that would be like a custom site where you can start from scratch and draw whatever you want, however you want. Or if you think about a coloring page, it's kind of like a templated site. So it's got some lines and stuff, but there's still a lot you can do with it to make it look different than other people's. And so, but when you pull up a website, you can't necessarily tell by looking at a website whether it's been built custom or from a templated site. And it doesn't necessarily matter from a user perspective, but it does matter kind of from the business owner perspective, depending on kind of what your needs are. So that's why I think it's worth talking about just for a minute. So custom coded site is created by a developer or a programmer or somebody who knows how to do code, right? So they need tech experience. They're usually a professional coder. The cool thing about these kinds of sites, they are fully customizable. I mean, there really aren't any constraints as far as design or functionality. Basically, if you can dream it, it can probably be built by a programmer or a developer that knows what they're doing. So obviously, as with any other custom item in life, custom service or product, this is usually the more expensive route to go. Most of my Dropleaf clients use custom sites, but these are mid to large size companies who have very specific needs for their websites. And so we almost always code them from scratch. The other nice thing about being customizable is that they're usually a lot easier to scale. So as your business grows and changes, it's usually very easy to change it because they're fully customizable. So template, on the other hand, can be awesome. I love to, my site is templated. I'm not knocking. I don't want you to think I'm knocking templated sites at all. You can use things like Squarespace, Wix, WordPress themes. My site was built on a WordPress theme. What else? Weebly, and there's a lot of them out there. WordPress is my favorite personal choice, but if you're going to completely do it on your own, I would recommend Squarespace, and we can talk more about that later if anybody has specific questions. But I've had Squarespace sites before, and we used to build them for clients too. So I've got some familiarity with that. But you don't need any tech experience usually with these kinds of sites, although it can be really helpful. I will say that. One thing I've learned is that even templated sites can benefit from having a programmer's inside knowledge because or somebody that at least knows enough code to be dangerous, that you can kind of get into the back end of the template and rearrange something. Like if the template has a certain header in a certain place or a certain size, if you know somebody who can poke around in the back end of the code, you can usually do some finessing, because otherwise you are 100% stuck with the template's kind of pre-designed, predetermined options for you. So obviously templates, you have some constraint like I mentioned, but many of these templated sites now are really robust. I mean, they have come a long way and come with lots of options. So there are really some great options out there. This is usually a much cheaper route to go because there's less expertise required. And they can still be scalable because there are lots of, like I said, many of these are robust now, but it's definitely less scalable than having a custom coded site. So for example, if down the road you decide like, oh, I need some new feature on my website, like I want to start selling things now, so I need e-commerce, I need to be able to sell things on my website, or you want a photo gallery or something, right? Could be anything. If the template that you've chosen doesn't support that, then you might have to get a new template or kind of start over. And so that is one thing that's nice about a custom coded site. So this, like I said, it's just a quick breakdown that I thought might be helpful because it is a little confusing. And if you're going to have somebody do it for you, it can be helpful to know this information so that as you go to talk to them, you sort of know what you're talking about. So one of the other really big questions I get when it comes to websites is the whole, like, should I DIY this or should I hire somebody to do it? I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because really, if you go back and listen to the week we talked about hiring logo designers, it's very much the same situation. It's very much you get what you pay for. And it's very much the same in terms of whether you go with someone who just dabbles, or you go with a freelancer or an agency, and all those kinds of options. It's really the same here with web stuff. So if you want to go back and listen to that, if you're thinking about hiring it out. But I will say this, DIY is doable. I'm not anti-DIY. Many folks do it and do a decent job at it. But many more of us, me included, would rather take a bath in hot coals than try to create a professional looking website. Back in the day, I did it. Let me just say, I'm speaking from experience here. Back in the day, I did create a few sites for myself and for other people. And I have long since vowed never, 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 never. Because here's the thing. It would take me hours and hours and hours and hours and a lot of frustration and maybe some tears to get it to a place that I was even happy with it. And even then, it's not going to be anywhere near as professional or functional or beautiful as it would be if I hired it out to somebody who lives and breathes this stuff, right? It's not my point of highest contribution. It's not my sweet spot. And I am far better off spending my time doing things that are more in my sweet spot and impactful. And as much as I always cringe at spending money on stuff that I feel like I could maybe string together myself, I've learned over the years, I've said this before, that I almost always end up making my money back and then some by spending my time on stuff that's more lucrative for me, right? Things I'm actually really good at. And the end result is so much more powerful and more professional that I think about the number of clients I get or the level of clients that I get as a result of the pro job, and it makes it totally worth it. So I know this is a hard one to swallow because I still struggle with it. Like I said, I don't like spending money. I don't have to. But like I said, I look back at anything like this that I have outsourced, and not once have I regretted the decision and not recouped my cost. Not once. And every time I have someone say to me, oh, I love your website, or, your website was so great. I was so excited to connect with you. I think, thank goodness I hired pros, because ain't nobody going to be saying that if I did this myself. So that being said, if you want to DIY it or you feel like you have to, go for it, especially if you like tinkering around with this kind of stuff or you have some experience in this area. I say go for it. You can always, that's the beauty of web, nothing is set in stone. You can always go back or bring someone in to help. So like I said, go back and listen to the materials from week 8 if you are thinking about hiring it out, because I think that many of the same principles apply here. So you want somebody who has a strong portfolio they can show you. You want somebody who asks you really good questions about your business goals and your target audience, and you want to get multiple estimates, and all of those kinds of things are going to fit in here. So I did post on Sunday, I think, in our Facebook group, an example of somebody who, my ideal for this kind of work, if you are on a budget, is to go with somebody who has agency experience but is now a freelancer, because they're going to be a lot cheaper than an agency, but they're still going to have killer experience and that big picture strategic marketing experience. So I posted somebody who's here in Indianapolis, Kristen Pruis. She's on my team, but she also runs her own business. And so I posted a link to her business's website, because she's amazing at specifically female entrepreneur branding and websites. And I send people her way all the time. And she gives a discount as well to anybody from my class. So happy to connect you personally, or if you just want to look at her website. If nothing else, go look at her website just to get an idea of offerings and kind of how people are pitching themselves. So, okay. I know that when it comes to websites, probably the number one question, I've already hit a lot of the big questions, but is how much is it going to cost me, right? So I want to tackle this. Since my company, Dropleaf, regularly creates websites for people, I get asked this question a lot. But unfortunately, there's no easy answer, because you know what the answer is. It depends, right? Don't you hate that as an answer? But I can break down for you some of the most kind of common things that impact price. I think that will help you kind of get a better sense of it and get just a more focused estimate from someone if you need to. So I just want to quickly look at some of the cost factors. So first being, do you already have a brand established? Do you have a logo and colors and typefaces? Because that's going to help somebody go faster to develop a website for you. And so often that will impact the price, because then they don't have to spend any time doing that for you. So the second one is going to be like, what are your design needs? So do you need custom drawn graphics? Do you need infographics? Do you need photography? Do you already have all that stuff? Can you use stock photography? So how much kind of design work you need done on your site is going to be a big difference too. Same thing along the same lines as what kind of functionality do you need? So what do you need your website to do for you? So for example, like, do you need e-commerce? Do you need to sell things, right? Excuse me, on your website, do you need the ability to sell things? And you may not already know some of the functionality that you need, but if you do sit down with someone and hire someone, they should be able to walk you through a bunch of questions and figure out what functionality do you need. Do you need to integrate your social media? Do you need, like, there's lots of things. So they're going to be able to help you figure that out. Also, how many pages are we talking about here? So obviously a 10-page site might cost more than a 5-page site, but that's not always the case, because often designers kind of create a template so that you might have multiple pages that are similar in design, in which case it's no big deal for them to add extra pages if it's just using a template. So a professional should be able to help you figure out what pages you need to serve your audience well, and what the cost will be. So obviously it depends on your type of business and what you need your site to do for you. But in general, I believe less is more. So most startup sites that I'm familiar with have usually 3 to 4 pages. So homepage, about page, either like a services or product page, usually a contact page, sometimes a blog. I'm a huge fan of websites having blogs for multiple reasons. So usually that's pretty standard, but obviously it depends on what it is that you're doing. So the next one here is, are you writing the copy? Do they need to write the copy for you or bring in a professional to write the copy? That's going to affect price as well. And then what level of expertise are you going to engage, right? So again, you usually get what you pay for, but we all have budgets that we have to stick to. We all have our own financial situations. So just know that if you're hiring a college student or someone who's just learning, obviously that's going to be significantly cheaper than a tried and true professional. And there's a huge range, you guys. So I've seen everything from free to $150 an hour for this kind of work, and then everything in between. So yeah, it really is all over the place. So I hesitate to throw any numbers at you, but I will say in general, for startups who need really basic sites, so like I talked about those pages earlier, with no crazy functionality or integrations, usually templated sites done by freelancers tend to be in the range of $800 to $1,500 at the low end, all the way up to $5,000 to $7,000 at the high end. So that's a really rough range. Again, it depends on all those factors we talked about. So just one other thing when it comes to cost, I want to give you a flag on. There are some associated costs for having a website that are often not built into proposals from people that you might ask for a proposal. So things like your domain name, usually that's 10 to 15 bucks a year. It's not expensive. But you got to host your website somewhere. That's usually between 5 and 15 bucks a month. Not bad. Photography is often not included. So be thinking about that. Also things like plugins, which is just something that'll give your website the capability you need to sell things or whatever. So usually these are not like bank breakers, but they can take you off guard if you're not expecting that, and nobody wants that when you're on a budget. So a great question, it's a great question to ask. If you're talking with a professional, make sure that they can give you a list of any extra fees or things that aren't necessarily covered in their proposal. So, okay, I want to talk about web domain names before we move on to email newsletters, because I know some of you are kind of in the thick of this right now. So, there are always exceptions with domain names and what makes a good domain name, but I just want to give you some kind of simple best practices around this. So the first one's pretty obvious. Usually your domain name is pretty aligned with your business name in some way. It doesn't have to be identical, but it's usually very closely aligned if it's not the actual name. Usually it's easy to spell and say, so I encourage you, same thing with when you were coming up with your business name, avoid words that are commonly misspelled or hard to pronounce, because you want people to be able to type it in right the first time. Short and sweet is usually better. So there's, less room for typing error if you keep it nice. And I don't know if you've ever seen a long URL written out on a business card or somewhere. It just is really weird looking and awkward. So I would encourage you to keep it short and sweet. .coms are still very popular, as you know, for extensions, and people are very comfortable with .coms and stuff. But again, this isn't a deal breaker. I think there are some great other extensions out there, .net, .info, .us, .co. My website is a .co. And as more and more .coms, we've talked about this, I think, become unavailable, you're just going to continue to see more and more different extensions used. So keep that in mind. I strongly recommend people not to use hyphens. I know a lot of people use hyphens to try to get the .com that they want, but I think that this can really trip people up because they're different on your keyboard. As you know, there are dashes and hyphens, and people often type the wrong one in, and it just can be really confusing, and it'll get people to the wrong place, and we don't want that. So I would recommend avoiding hyphens if you can. And then once you have chosen the domain name that you want, you have to register it. So you can use lots of different sites. I'm a big fan of namecheap.com. You can use whatever you want. I would recommend that you select the auto renew option. So usually it'll give you the option for it to, and I'm not an auto renew kind of girl because I don't like charges, just like recurring that I don't have to think about. But when it comes to your URL for your business, I would do it, because if you forget, which is something I would do, if you forget to renew it, even though it's only $8 or whatever, it can then become available for someone else to snatch up. And then you're in big trouble because you've got a business with a URL and all of a sudden you don't own it anymore. So I always do auto renew for mine. So, okay, before we leave this little section on websites, I want to leave you with this. It's something I've said before, but I want to say it again. Websites are yet another stop along our journey where perfectionism can just totally suffocate and stop us in our tracks. So you might be spending tons of time looking around, looking at other websites for inspiration, and you might have a million different ideas and directions you can run. And we want to get it right the first time, right? We all want to get it right for the first time. And so it can just be really paralyzing. But I don't want you to forget that this is a process. This is a process. And like I said earlier, the beauty of web is that nothing is set in stone. So you can continue to tweak and refine your copy and your graphics as your business changes and grows, and as you have a more budget and time and those kinds of things. So my best advice today is just to absorb what we've talked about here, take it to heart, and commit to taking that next step, whatever that next step might be for you when it comes to your web presence. Just commit to getting it done and don't let yourself get hung up in the weeds of perfectionism. So again, I've shared with you before, for me, this is I'm preaching to myself here too. So I know that it affects a lot of us like that. So, okay, I want to spend the rest of our time, which isn't much, talking about email newsletters and how critical, mission critical they are to starting and sustaining a successful business. So I told you before, I like to break things down journalism style. So that's what I'm going to do today. All right, we're going to talk about the what. When I'm talking about an email list, I am talking about a list of people who have opted in or agreed to receive ongoing emails from you. The opt-in part here is really, really important because it's a very bad idea to send mass emails to people who haven't agreed to join your list. You can get in very big trouble with the law. You can get blacklisted. You can get reported as a spammer. And besides all that, it's just impolite and really bad business. So don't do it. But building a list of folks who have agreed to join your email list is a great idea. And so I want to give you a few reasons why. Number one, access. This is what I mentioned earlier about social media. You want the ability to engage with your people by going to them. You don't want to have to wait for them to come to you, hoping they'll visit your website, hoping that your social media posts are going to show up in their streams. You get to show up directly in their inboxes when you've got something important to say. The second reason why is these are your people. These aren't strangers who you just like hoping they might have an ounce of interest in what you have to offer. These are your people who have opted in, right? So if they've signed up and agreed to receive your emails, they obviously have some interest in what you have to offer, which means they aren't a cold audience. They are a lukewarm or even hot prospect, right? So that's like worth lots there, that kind of value. And so you don't have to worry about annoying them. They have voluntarily joined your email list. If they want to opt out, they can opt out, and more power to them, right? You want people in there that are hungry for what it is that you have to offer right now. So they are your people. The next reason why they're so important is that it's more stable. Goes back to what I said about social media. So the ins and outs of email marketing do change some, right? But it is way more stable than social media. So social media sites, like I said, are making it harder and harder to organically reach people. And so you want to have access, right? And reach the people that you want to reach when you want to reach them. We don't want someone else deciding that for us. We want to be in charge of that. And email makes that possible. And then the last thing here is that you can do tailored content, which is really a cool thing you can do. You can segment your email list, right, without being bound by any social media constraints. So when you use an email marketing program like MailChimp is the one I love, but there are lots of good ones out there, Constant Contact, and I could mention lots of them. You can segment your list so that you can personalize those touch points, right? So just as an example, let's say your business is staffing. So one of my clients used to be a big HR staffing firm. And so we had basically two audiences, job seekers and employers, right? So we segmented our email list. So every month we sent emails out to the job seekers that might have like job openings or might have resume tips or interview tips or whatever. And then we had a separate set of emails that would go out to the employers. So these are busy CEOs that had different things in mind, different things they wanted to hear from us about, like leadership topics and things like that. So with email, it's cool because you can tailor your content and send what you want to send, when you want to send it, to whom you want to send it, right? Okay, so this is all well and good, right? But you might be wondering, like, where do you even start if you don't have a list? I want to give you just a couple, there are a million things you can do to grow an email list, but I want to give you just a couple fun ideas, some of my favorite ways to grow an email list, especially if you're starting from scratch or if you have a really small list and you want to make it a robust one. So first of all, on your website, make sure that your email sign up is front and center. Don't hide it. A lot of times it's just like buried in the footer and we expect people to sign up like that. So make it really visible, make it maybe in multiple locations, right? One of my all-time favorite ways to grow an email list is to give something away. So one of the best and most common tactics for growing an email list is to offer some sort of free download. People sometimes call them gated downloads, freemiums, or you might have heard of lead magnets. We're talking about the same thing here. So no matter what you called it, these are value-packed, audience-relevant pieces of content that you're offering up in exchange for someone giving their email list. You've probably seen this before on websites you've gone to, right? It could be everything from you're going to download a checklist or a list of top tips or a worksheet or whatever. But the key is that it's something that the audience really wants and really needs. Also, social media is a great way to get people to join your email list. So putting it out there, offering up information and saying, hey, if you want more, go hop over to my website and sign up for my email list. Also, holding a contest or giveaway is a great idea. So bundle some of your best products or services, or it can be somebody else's stuff, and have people enter to win by giving their email list. Next, event signups. So if you're going to hold a special event, if you're running a booth at an event or a conference or something, it can be really fun to do another kind of giveaway instead of you can just have an email sign up on your table where people can sign up, but I would recommend having some sort of giveaway or something so that in exchange for their email address, you're offering some sort of contest. That's always a good incentive. And then last but not least, just start asking people. I think it's easy to get caught up in these kind of big promotional ideas and forget that sometimes all we need to do is ask, right? Start with the people who already know you and love you. Call them, text them, message them, ask if they don't mind you adding them to their list, right? So send emails to your contacts that you already have, and that's a great place to start. It's amazing how quickly you can grow a list by just starting with people that already know you. So, all right, we are definitely getting short on time. So I want to leave you with a quote that I am over the moon about. Don't build links, build relationships. And my favorite part of this quote is that it's written by the CEO of a tech company. This guy runs a tech SEO company, which of course has everything to do with links, right? But this guy has it right. If you keep your focus front and center on people, on your target audience, on serving them well, on building relationships with them, that is going to be what's key here. That's going to be way more important than all these other things. So, if you're doing all the marketing stuff you're doing in the name of human-to-human relationship, you can't go wrong, and you're miles ahead of the rest of the pack who have likely lost sight of this. It's really easy to lose sight of the fact that this is all about relationships. So I want to make sure that I share that with you. All right, action steps for the week. I want you to determine that next step for your website and pick a goal. Pick something you can do to start growing your email list, or if you're starting from scratch, take one step to building your email list. So, all right. Sorry that I went a little bit over. Are there any questions before we go? Nope. Okay. Well, I will see you guys. Thank you for being flexible and going to Tuesday again this week. And then next week, we will be back to our normal Thursday schedule. So, yay. All right. Thanks, guys.
Hey, Jen.
Oh, yeah. You got a question?
Well, something you'd said,
yeah,
going with the professional designer versus doing it yourself. I think of what I could do by myself, and that you only get one chance to make a first impression.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm in the process. Mine is almost done. I just sent him a second set of content. I looked at what he did, and so I may send that to you and have you take a look at it.
Yeah, post it in a group if you're comfortable doing that too. It would be great just for everybody to be able to weigh in, or you can send it to me. Either one's fine, but absolutely. And I think it's not too late for you to go back through some of this checklists and things that I had in this slideshow and just kind of vet it through that, run it through like a filter and see if anything needs tweaked. And again, the beauty is, even if you need to launch it, and then you've got a couple months, you can work on it and just continue to make tweaks. So I think that's the beauty of web. It makes me feel a whole lot better on web stuff for sure. So, all right.
I can make tweaks, but right now I don't have administrative powers over it. So I still have to keep paying him every time I want to make a tweak.
Yes.
So I kind of like to get it right the first time.
Yes. And I would definitely make sure, one thing I always tell people when they're starting out is to make sure that you get the keys to your own website, because you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you have to call somebody every time you want a word changed or a picture swapped out. Now, I still would have a professional do big changes if I want to add a bunch of crazy stuff, but you shouldn't have to pay someone just to make some small tweaks. They should be able to hand the keys over to your website, and so that you're able to do that for sure.
Fix the typos I find.
Exactly. So, all right, guys, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.
Bye.